started. Meenakshi, I leave the floor to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this introduction. Can you hear me clearly? Yeah. So, I mean, as Vitsila has already given you a brief introduction of my talk today, uh, I would just like to show you the book. I'm going to share my PPT here. Yeah. So this is what is going to be the presentation, the final farewell, death, ritual, and inequality in India. This is the book based on which I'm going to be presenting. I have pulled out some excerpts from the book and also some interviews which have not been featured in the book. I'll be talking about my conversations with the death workers and many other activists and filmmakers in India. I would be also talking about that. Uh, Now, just giving you a brief introduction to the structure of the presentation. I'm going to talk about caste and death work in India, the relationship of both. Within that, I'll be talking about cremation workers in Delhi, my interviews with them and my conversations with them. I'll be also talking about domes, the cremation workers in Varanasi, which are a very distinct category of funeral workers, which I will elucidate through my presentation. And then we have funeral priests, the Mahapatras. I'll be talking about them. Second part is going to be access to funerary spaces. What determines who has access to these spaces, the burial and cremation spaces. And then I'll be talking about my experiences during COVID-19 pandemic, because I started researching the book right after the second wave of the deadly COVID-19 pandemic in India. And I would be speaking about my experience of interviewing people and visiting the funerary spaces, but mostly talking on the phone because of limitations of COVID-19. But yes, those conversations were very important and very candid because workers had so much to say. So I would give you a little backdrop of this book, and I'm going to come back to this later on. The PPT, I'll also share some pictures with you from my fieldwork, for which I'll be using the PPT again, but mostly I'll be reading the narratives which I have pulled out from the conversations that I've had and the excerpts from the book. But first, I'll give you a little backdrop of why did I write this book to begin with. Um, this book began as a personal journey. I lost my father in 2019, and that was my first close encounter with death rituals as a chief mourner. During this time, several things stayed with me. I remember noticing a cremation worker whose eyes were red and his speech was slurred, and I found myself wondering why. Later, while performing the 11th day rituals, I asked the Hindu priest whether he officiates other life cycle rituals as well. Somewhat surprised, he replied, हम सिर्फ मृत्यु से जुड़े काम करते हैं in Hindi. We only perform death related rituals, not other rituals, not the auspicious ones. Until then, I had not realized that there existed a distinct category of priests associated specifically with funeral work. We later traveled to Haridwar, an important Hindu pilgrimage site, to immerse my father's ashes and update the genealogical records. As I began researching further, I encountered much more, some of which I'm going to discuss here in this talk. So I'm going to start with giving you a little backdrop of death and caste work, and then I'm going to get into the stories of two crematorium workers that I have pulled out from my book. This work is considered ganda, dirty or polluted. But हमारे लोग, our people, have to do this. बड़े लोग शव को हाथ नहीं लगाएंगे. No upper caste person will ever touch a corpse, said Manish, a cremation worker. In India, the handling of dead bodies has traditionally been confined to Dalit communities treated like untouchables. Shaped by oppressive belief systems rooted in notions of purity and pollution, people born in these caste groups are forced to continue in hereditary occupations because of strict caste divisions. I'm going to first speak about a cremation worker from Delhi, as I said before. Among Hindu, Sikhs, Jain, and Buddhist communities, the bodies are offered to pyre in an open pyre cremation. There are gas incinerators available in big towns, but most people prefer the open pyre ones. I met Ramesh at the South Delhi crematorium. I waited for him while he lashed the wood logs and helped the family arrange the pyre, methodically stacking the wood and gently laying the body on the pile. Right after he helped the family light the funeral pyre, I pulled him aside for a conversation. The smoke and sparks from the burning pyres had turned his shirt pale. Ramesh will tend to the pyre until the family returns to gather the remains the following day or later during the day. As I said before, only the lower caste groups or Dalits treated like untouchables handle funeral work in India. Amidst the burning pyres, the workers toil for meager salaries. My job is challenging, underpaid, and not well respected. Besides, since we are not on the payroll, we are at the mercy of the bereaved families for payments. In addition, there is no job security. We are not even regularized like government employees, he said. The report, Dignity Disposed, highlights that in Bangalore, most workers work contractually and are not registered on the payrolls. Even the payment cycles are erratic, and sometimes the wages are not paid for months altogether. Not just this, there are occupational hazards involving the work. In some instances, workers face specific risks like losing their eyes or even getting burnt by fire. I came across one such case in Varanasi when I spoke to a, a CNG operated crematorium worker. Uh, he showed me some marks and how there was no insurance and how he had to do out of pocket expenditure to deal with those burns. Cremation work is a male dominated work. I found one woman manager in Tamil Nadu, south of India, who faced censure and threats for doing this job. I have featured Praveena's interview in the book. Now, coming back to my conversation with Ramesh, while trying to ease my eyes and lungs from the smoke emanating from the pyre, I asked him what was it like during the COVID-19 pandemic. As he wiped his eyes and face with a gamcha, a towel hanging around his neck, he replied, "It was tough. I have never witnessed such scenes in my life before." Ah, he added, there were long queues. We created makeshift pyres to manage a large death toll. But it wasn't enough. Bodies came wrapped in plastic sheets, one after the other. The name tags were the lone identity of the deceased. There was no time to breathe. My phone was ringing off the hook. I would receive frantic calls in the middle of the night from bereaved families requesting the funeral of their loved ones. I also got requests from ministers and senior officers requesting me to oblige them. I was barely getting any sleep. My eyes were watery and itchy. I would hear strange voices whenever I tried sleeping. There was widespread reporting on the overburdening of the crematorium staff during the pandemic. Despite challenges, the workers served consistently amidst the scorching heat of fires and soaring mercury in the month of May. Since people who deal with dead are at higher risk, the WHO recommended protective and preventive measures for workers and staff. However, there was widespread reporting in how these workers were denied protective gear. Many couldn't wear the gear or the suits because of excessive heat, they reported, around the pyres. Before ending the interview, he told me, these days several people approach me for an interview request. He said, grinning, this was perhaps one instance when a funeral worker derived some attention from an otherwise thankless and mundane job. I wondered what the situation would have been without their crucial contribution during the COVID-19 pandemic. This was the story of the cremation worker from Delhi, uh, whom I had interviewed, I think, 3-4 months after the second wave of COVID-19 pandemic. The second narrative is of a dome worker. Dome, they're called domes. They are a specific caste of cremation workers in Varanasi. I will give you a context as we go forward. Mukesh Kumar Chaudhary, 37, has been tending to cremation pyres for years. I have been working at the Manikarnika Ghat in Varanasi for last 20 years or so. This has been going on from generation to generation. My great-grandfather, my grandfather, and my father has been cremating bodies, and now I do it too. All my cousins are engaged in that work as well. Says Mukesh, his mouth full of tobacco and a faded gamcha towel slung over his shoulder. Varanasi, the spiritual capital for Hindus in India, is one of the oldest and the holiest cities in Hinduism. Many travel to the city from around the world to take their last breath here. Others come here to cremate their dead at the ghats of Manikarnika Ghat, where Mukesh works. It is believed that dying here helps one attain moksha, the liberation of one's soul from the endless cycle of death and rebirth. A cremation ghat is considered the most inauspicious among Hindus because of the ritual pollution of the corpses. But in Varanasi, the Manikarnika Ghat is the focal point. It is seen as the most auspicious of places where Shiva, the deity associated with death among Hindus, himself bestows salvation. Many people in Varanasi make their living from death, just like Mukesh. Domes, the caste which Mukesh belongs to, are corpse burners, are one such group. They are keepers of the sacred flames supposedly burning for centuries on which they have the exclusive ownership. It is believed that receiving the auspicious fire from the eternal flames to burn the corpse through domes helps attain moksha. They are therefore viewed as the custodians of salvation. Adjacent to the steps leading to the Manikarnika Ghat is a slightly elevated, partially enclosed stone space locally known as Madi. Here burns the dome's Agni, the eternal fire kept alive in a shallow pit and regularly replenished with dry wood. From here, one can watch the multiple incessantly burning funeral pyres at Manikarnika Ghat, and one can see the drama of death unfold, priests and domes haggling with family members over money matters. Our job is to liberate the dead, to help them get mukti. We belong to the Chaudhary, the dome caste, shares Mukesh. He speaks about the association of his caste with Raja Harishchandra, a legendary king in Hindu mythology. It doesn't matter if people believe it or not, history stands as the testimony. That's why the tradition continues, he asserts. Even though their role is crucial, domes like Chaudhary belong to the lowest rung of the social ladder. They, like other death workers in India, belong to the lowest caste group. Although discriminated against, they have the uncontested power over the corpses in the burning ghats of Varanasi. the shove or corpse is brought to the ghats on the wooden bier, the arthi, shrouded in white sheets decorated with flowers by the family members on their shoulders while chanting Ram Naam Satya Hai, God's name is truth, which has to be offered to the Agni, the fire. The corpse, the shove, is ritually prepared for the sacrifice with ghee, the clarified butter, flower garlands, and sandalwood oil before it is presented to the fire. The work on the ground, the labor work, is done by the dome workers, while while the Maliks, the bosses, have the control over the eternal fire. Mukesh Chaudhary works for his Maliks, his bosses. It is the Malik's work to provide the flame to mourning families. The boss lights a bundle of khar, a holy grass, with the sacred fire and hands it to the primary mourner. After laying the body on the wood pyre, the eldest son or the male member lights it. There are also specifications on who lights the funeral pyre among Hindus. Although the price of the auspicious fire has been fixed at rupees 500, equivalent to $6, the Maliks quote a higher price from the families, and families end up giving in because of a lack of bargaining power here. If one tries to haggle with the Don, he just might walk away, says Amrit, a tourist guide in Varanasi. Manikarnika Ghat is not an easy place to work. It is physically and emotionally exhausting, surrounded by blazing pyres and perpetual smoke emanating from them. To deal with the stressful environment, many of them succumb to drinking alcohol and other kind of addictions. For those who work here, it becomes a way of life despite the relentless heat and oppressive atmosphere. I don't find the work challenging, he tells me. We are used to working amidst pyres. It's been going on for years. Mukesh shares, slipping English words into the conversation. I start my day at 10 a.m. and carry on until 10 p.m., he shares. In a day, a worker cremates 8 to 10 lifeless bodies, inhaling the fumes, earning around rupees 150, which is equivalent to $1.73 for each corpse. However, they may earn more depending on the willingness of the families to shell out some tips to them. Their income is tied to the number of cremations they can perform during a day. More cremations means more money. He explains his work to me. We are responsible for setting up the funeral pyre, arranging the body, tending to it, and managing the cremation from start to the finish. After the fire is extinguished, they gather the ashes and help the family in immersing the remains in Ganga, a crucial post-cremation ritual important for the salvation of the soul. On his weekly shift or pari, locally known as pari, Mukesh, along with other workers, sifts through the ashes for gold and silver left on the corpses. Other than the fees the domes collect from the families, these ornaments are a good source of income for the workers. He tells me the rings and jewelry are handed over to their maliks, their bosses, who later sell them and distribute the earning amongst the workers. For the last 15 years, Mukesh has been collaborating with a wood shop owner on the ghat on contract basis, negotiating with clients to secure favorable deals for the owner in exchange of some commission. If the body is heavy, it needs 3 quintals and 2 quintals for the lighter ones, he explains. These days, he concentrates more on this work, his contractual work, while his brother toils as a worker. Dealing in wood is more lucrative. I make 2,000 rupees, equivalent to $23 in a day sometimes. I also get to network with more people, he tells me. Mukesh has studied till 10th grade. He tells me that he's tried his hand at other things, but somehow it didn't work for him. He has 2 children, 8 and 13, and they both study in a school. I want to educate them. However, I can't write their destiny, he tells me. But whether the future generations will be able to break free from this intergenerational caste-based work that guarantees a steady income remains to be seen. However, the work of a dome is perhaps going to remain relevant in India due to the deeply ingrained Hindu belief in open fire cremations and the dome's legacy as guardians of the sacred fire and gatekeepers to moksha. Furthermore, the work remains vital as upper caste communities are averse to touching the corpses which are seen as polluted. If discrimination against death workers restricted to Hindu caste? Since I have done my research with other faiths as well, I discovered that similar accounts of prejudice encountered by Nasusilas or corpse burners within the Zoroastrian community. They have to take a purifying bath called Nahan after handling the corpses, but the discrimination continues even after they have taken this purificatory bath. In India, the number of Nasusilas that work in dakmas is diminishing owing to the perpetual discrimination. So I have also observed this sort of discrimination with other, not just the cremation workers, but also the workers who work in the Qabristans, the Muslim Qabristans and the Christian cemeteries in India, and even the Sikh and Hindus mostly share the crematorium, so it's not any different for them that way. It's common across castes and communities in India, but I have given you examples from Varanasi since it was more prominent among Hindus and it was more somewhere it's also mentioned in the scriptures, so it becomes even more prominent here. So I thought I would discuss these two examples, but it was fairly prominent among Nasusilas in Zoroastrian communities as well. Now, is this discrimination restricted to cremation workers? Let's look at the work of funeral pundits. They're also called Mahapatras to understand this. As I said before, during my interviews with pundits, I discovered a separate category of priests who preside over the 11-day last rites among Hindus. They are addressed by different names in India. For instance, in the north of India, a familiar name is Mahapatra. They're called great vessels, but they're not treated like great vessels. They are called Mahabrahmin or the great Brahmin in Maharashtra. They're referred to as Apar Brahmins in the south of India, dealing with rituals required later in life. Apar means later. The funeral pundits are different from other priests involved in the last rites and rituals among Hindus, especially the rituals pertaining to the 11th day. A ritual priest in Varanasi told me the funeral priest, is the Acharya of 11-day rituals. Similarly, Rajesh, a funeral pundit at Nigam Bodh Ghat, a historical ghat in Delhi, explained, God Brahma has created 16 karmas, that is 16 rites. The other pundits perform 15 and we conduct the last karam. We have a dominance over that karam. They don't enter our work and we don't enter theirs. I do cremation, pindan and asti visarjan, which is the immersion of ashes for my clients. He explains. While talking to Rajesh, I learned how even the work of these pundits, just like the cremation workers, is considered ganda, polluting or dirty. Since death in the Hindu religion is seen as ritually polluted, work related to it is also viewed as polluting. Therefore, the death-related job is relegated to these lower order priests in the hierarchy. This highly polluting work is left to these particular Brahmins. They perform services like bearing the corpses from the place of death to the cremation ground. They are also called faceless Brahmins in the south because one should never ever remember seeing their ill-omened faces. Otherwise, they may host you like ghosts, just like the spirits. Not just their subordinate role, these priests are treated as outcasts. Jonathan Parry, in his seminal work, describes them as lower degree Brahmins. Though unequivocally Brahmins, Mahabrahmins are lower degree Brahmins who are treated as untouchables or achut, that is, not to be touched. Therefore, no person of a clean caste should ever dine with them. Hence, in theory, they should live outside the village and the south in the direction of death. A ritual priest in Varanasi told me with disdain, after performing the 11th day ritual, the Brahmin should leave. People don't want to see his face, but unfortunately, one keeps bumping into them these days, he said. So this was my conversation with different people, and through them I understood how even the funeral workers, the Mahapatras, are treated just like cremation workers as untouchables, and one shouldn't see their face again. And they accept it as their reality. They know that the work that they do is ritually impure, and which is why they're treated like that. But they also know that they're indispensable in these 11 days, and you cannot get done with your last rites and rituals, especially among Hindus, if these priests are not available. So they know that just like their domes, their work, their role is indispensable during these 11 days. Now I'm going to come to the second part of the presentation, where I'm going to talk about access to funerary spaces. So the caste of a person not only decides who performs the funeral work, but also who gets to access the funerary spaces. They don't let us cremate our dead on their cremation ground, says a Kalbelia nomadic community from Rajasthan in India, known for their folk dance. They are shunned by the mainstream and the other Dalit communities. In India, caste determines a person's access to basic rights in public spaces, be it education, temples, or hospitals. Even though the progressive legislation like Article 17 of the Indian Constitution abolishes all forms of untouchability, practicing it is considered an offense punishable by law. The reality is, however, different. During my initial research for the book, I found that members of the Dalit community seen as polluting are denied entry to cremation and burial spaces reserved for dominant caste groups, and even prevented from using the land restricted explicitly for them. In order to unravel more, I started speaking to the activists, filmmakers, researchers, and members of the Dalit communities. What I discovered was stark and heartbreaking. A Dalit activist shared instances of discrimination with me. He said, during our work with communities across India, we found that Dalits are forbidden from cremating or burying their dead in the crematoriums and cemeteries used by upper caste groups across faiths. In some cases, the funeral spaces are also demarked. There are separate shamshans or crematoriums for different caste groups. The upper caste members, the dominant caste people, mark their cremation grounds by installing boards specifying the name of the caste groups that are quote unquote eligible to use the space, said a journalist. The situation is similar across religions and regions in the country. I found such cases in Maharashtra and Punjab and many other states in India. We have no land of our own, so when the upper caste groups don't let us bury our dead on their lands, we have to bury them around our tents. If we resist, they resort to violence, said the member of the Kalbelia community, the nomadic group. He added, we have no place to live or die, no government identification cards. The pain in his voice was palpable. Looking at the gravity of the situation, Dalit activists campaign for separate funeral spaces. But does allotting these separate spaces solve the issue? My research highlighted that to some extent it does, but not all. The high caste communities don't let Dalits carry their funeral processions through the roads leading to the crematoriums or qabristans. In one of the cases, the procession had to be carried through a garbage yard. I recorded cases of physical violence or assault instigated against the members of the Dalit communities by the dominant caste groups. However, one stood out for me, which I'm going to narrate here. Ani Devi of Bhairwa caste, a Dalit caste from a village in Rajasthan, died on 4th July 2020. While the family was taking the funeral procession through a predetermined route, the path aligned to the agricultural field of the dominant caste was obstructed by barbed wires. When the members attempted to pass through the wires, they were forcibly stopped by the dominant caste members of the village. When the family tried to argue, the high caste groups reacted violently. They hurled stones and abused them, leading to severe injuries and fractures of the Dalit members. This was shared by one of the activists, Mr. Gopal Ram Verma, who's also a Dalit activist in Rajasthan. I spoke to him and he had many reports that he had compiled and he was to submit to the Human Rights Commission. But does it help submitting these reports? The complaints in many instances go unregistered or unattended because of the political and administrative clout of the dominant caste groups. So, what do Dalit members do in such instances when they have no access to funerary spaces or mortuary spaces? We found that some buried or cremated their deceased next to the river or road. However, others who own land also disposed of their dead on their farmlands, confirmed another activist. These communities sometimes delay the burial for several days until they find a place to dispose of the dead because they have lack of access to land. The documentary 6 Feet Under showcases stories of Dalit families from several districts in Kerala, the South Indian state in India, who have been forced to bury their loved ones in their kitchens, rooms, and even under public pathways. There is something bigger happening behind the garb of caste politics, however. Or what is it? Discrimination in funeral spaces involves land, which is, of course, contentious and relatively a scarce resource. In India, at least 60% of Dalits and 90% of nomadic groups still don't own any land. They have no identification cards whatsoever. They do not have land for housing or livelihoods. Many poor people live in slums or unauthorized colonies without rights to the land they live on. So, what would these people resort to if they have no land of their own either? Along with this, they're denied land for cremations and burials. These issues have always existed, but private lands have become more contentious since globalization, shared another journalist I spoke to. In many states, mortuary spaces suffer encroachment by the dominant caste. These infringements are often regularized because privileged caste groups have access to the state bureaucracy. There is an allotment committee in the revenue department that allocates land, but in many instances, the assigned land is occupied by the dominant caste group. Shared a filmmaker, the filmmaker I spoke to in Kerala. In one of the conversations I had with Budnath from Kalbelia community, he told me we got some funeral land allotted for our community with immense struggle, but unfortunately, the upper caste members even took that away. Similar instances were highlighted by others in other states in India. So, this was another second part of my presentation where I speak about the access to cremation and burial spaces and how is it limited based on the caste group that you belong to. Now I'll come to the third part of my presentation where I'm going to speak about COVID-19 pandemic, the experiences of workers. I've touched upon that in my presentation on the cremation with the cremation worker, but I'm going to speak a little more about that in this part. ऐसा टाइम तो भगवान किसी को भी ना दिखाए. I hope no one has to witness such horrid scenes, said a death worker at Nigambodh Ghat, a historical ghat in Delhi. During deadly COVID-19 waves, we heard stories of medical staff shortages, essential supplies deficiency, and the scarcity of death care personnel in India. Along with this, funeral spaces shrank. In India, the enormous death toll and lack of preparedness that led to mishandling of the dead bodies, denying dignified last rites to the deceased. As a result, corpses were decaying in the hospitals without proper storage and transportation facilities. I spoke to volunteers and death care staff after the second wave to better understand the situation in India. Nilesh, a social worker from Pune, told me many unclaimed bodies were rotting in Sassoon, a public hospital in Pune. The bodies would stink, it was unbearable. The paperwork to release them was taking a very long time. The family members were clueless about the procedure. Some had to wait for hours before they collected the dead bodies of their loved ones. There were instances where the corpses were lying in homes without transportation and funeral facilities. During the second wave, the spaces to cremate had shrunk so much, due to which bodies were piling up faster than workers could cremate or bury. There were reports regarding scarcity of resources. The wood stocks were running low. Some even took advantage of the situation. Somebody in Noida, UP, told me, like overcharging money for the ambulance service or overcharging for the wood, and even there was a black market prevailing for the wood then. Then the government had to step in and fix the rates for these services. Across India, there were designated shamshans and kabristans for conducting COVID funerals. Although the families were issued tokens to streamline the process, there was still chaos. A crematorium manager in Delhi described the scene. I have worked here for 18 years, but I have never witnessed such things in my lifetime. Bodies stacked up since morning, with family members queuing outside. Sometimes we had to refuse and shut the gates. What could we do? The capacity to cremate was for 20, while we were managing around 50 uh, corpses every day. The scene was no different in Muslim Kabristans. One of the officers told me the main challenge we faced during the second wave was the shortage of space, as the graveyard spaces are already shrinking due to heavy encroachment on these lands. The other challenge was the scarcity of trained staff to manage the burial of COVID-related deaths. Even staff was scarce. Sometimes workers wanted to quit because they were burned out. It was a tough call for the supervisors to help the team, to keep the team motivated. Like Sharma from Nigambodh Ghat said, especially during the second wave, people were not ready to work. They were overworked. By evening, the workers said, "We want to go home. We can't manage this anymore." Due to scarcity of space and resources, there were instances when bodies were dumped in the Ganga River in states like Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, while others were buried in the sand. Besides, there were cases where the departed were denied a dignified death due to fear of stigma attached to coronavirus. During the second wave, I heard stories where the staff was scared of touching the corpse because of the fear of the unknown. Responding to these violations regarding the mishandling of bodies, the National Human Rights Commission issued an advisory to the central and state governments instructing the protection of the dignity and the rights of the dead. So these are the stories first-hand stories that I heard from the COVID workers and the cremation workers and the staff and the supervisors at these Kabristans. But it was not all that bad as well. I also heard some stories of hope, which I'm going to tell you very briefly here. I have recorded stories of volunteers the work of good Samaritans who did some commendable work without caring for their own safety and security. Some even converted their own vans into makeshift ambulances to help the families. Then there were young girls from Pune who volunteered for death work without informing their families. Later, the families realized when they were awarded for their work and when, when they were told that how their children were helping around that time. So I have featured those stories in the book of these volunteers and these young girls who had no understanding of, how to cremate the bodies. They stepped in and the difficulties they faced, and they felt very proud of their work later on. And when they were narrating the stories, it was quite an overwhelming experience for me as well. So I would end my presentation here. There is more to say. There is much more to share, I would say, but I will stop here. I hope you like the talk. I'm going to share some pictures uh, from my fieldwork with you all, and I hope that makes even more sense for everyone for what I'm talking about. So this is the open fire cremations. I took this. I couldn't take many pictures because I thought it wouldn't be right, but I did take some pictures of this one of this pyre which was almost burned. So I took the picture of this one in Delhi. And this is one of the cremation workers in Varanasi. He manages a CNG operated incinerator in Varanasi. I spoke to him and he showed me those marks on his leg, which I spoke about. And so this is one of the CNG incinerators in Varanasi. This is like deserted, like this cremation workers. He was laughing and telling me that, the government has invested so much money and yet people are more comfortable with the open fire ones. So there are not many who visited, but yes, some they do. So this is the Manikarnika Ghat. There's some kind of renovation going on right now, but you see this uh, burning pyres, you see these flames and smoke. There are so many pyres which are burning simultaneously, and you see these people surrounding this, and then there are these domes who are assisting them. So this is the scene at the Manikarnika Ghat, if you see. So, and you saw that CNG incinerator, how vacant it looked, which is also the case in many other crematoriums I visited in Delhi and other metro cities in India. So you can see these. This I took from the boat because I didn't feel right to take the pictures when I was at the ghat. So I was taking a boat ride and I took these some of these pictures. So um, thank you, and I will stop here and over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so
Yeah,
much. It's always very interesting. We were having this brief chat before the start of the session today. How different cultures are so different, but at the same time also sometimes very similar. There are some questions. I see one raised hand, which I believe is, just give me a second so I navigate through here. I think I saw Kitty. Am I right? Or was it yes? Because now it's not a raised hand anymore.
Hello, I was doing one of those applause reactions.
Okay.
I found that fascinating. Thank you so much. I've actually got your book and it's next on my book shelf to read because I'm a PhD student and I'm looking at 19th century death and burial practices in England and then how they were transported over through missionary networks to India. So just to say, I really love your writing and thank you so much.
thank you so much, Kitty. I hope you enjoy reading the book as well.
Thank you, Kitty. Are there any other questions or comments, or maybe someone who would like to share, I don't know, an experience which is somehow related to what we've heard? Dana? Dana, yes?
Yes. Hello, Meenakshi. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. So nice to see you here.
Likewise. I missed your presentation at DDD, at the last DDD, but now I'm following up. Thank you so much. It was a great presentation. I won't go into all those social inequalities that are very painful and whatever, but I had a small question when you were talking about, I have two questions actually. What is the default policy if there's an unclaimed body? Because that's often a reflection of how the country or state deals with body disposition. I mean, if let's say they don't have land, there's the spatial injustice of not being of having a place. If they just left the body, what would happen in that kind of flow? And another question that I had is that you noted that there's an 11-day period, I assume, from the death until whatever. Can you just give briefly a few markers of what those 11 days include? Thank you very much.
Thank you. What amazing questions, Anna. So yes, for unclaimed bodies, there is a process, a legal process that they have to follow. But generally, families do find some means to do it. But if not, there are some organizations I was working on a documentary and I have listed their work, how these non-for-profit organizations, they step in and they take the help of police, and then the police have some funds to arrange for their last rite. But generally, uh, because there are times when one doesn't know the religion of the deceased because it's an unclaimed body, so it is generally cremated. Through open fire cremations are slightly more expensive because wood comes in, and there are other things, but they are generally done through the CNG and electric operated incinerators. So there is a process, and I have listed that process in the book, and I have interviews of people who are doing this work. So, Dana, you can read about it in detail in the book. But yes, there is a process that the government follows, and then there are NGOs and there are individuals who are doing this great work. But it's never enough, I would say. So government or the police comes in much later, and then they would keep the body in the mortuary for some time, and these mortuaries are also very ill operated. Some of them are not even functioning, so that's another story altogether. I have a separate section and a chapter on that, but thank you for asking this question. It's a very, very important question. And then you asked about these 13 days. So we follow this period of 13 day of mourning among Hindus, and on 11th day you give some kind of donations in the name of the deceased, which is accepted by these Mahapatra Pandits. There are other rituals, 10-day rituals that we follow, and this period is considered highly polluting. We do Pinddan, and there are many other rituals which are being detailed in the book. But on the 11th day specifically, Mahapatras, they take donations in the name of the dead person. So if you're taking donations in the name of the dead person, like people give them like, beds, mattresses, and anything that the person might need in their journey, in the journey of the soul to the, to the heaven. So you give all that stuff. So you are accepting that stuff in the name of the dead person. So you are seen as somebody who is uh, taking that pap, or taking that pollution from the dead person. So that's why you are seen as a person who is polluted, because you're accepting something which no other caste person would accept. You also take money, but then these pundits also know that it's their day, 11th day. Families are going to give them money, and that's the only day that they are considered important. So they also ask for money, and they would also say, oh, I would need this much amount. They would quote a amount, and then the families would negotiate. So it's also that picture which comes in. But then there is, of course, a lot of discrimination because they cannot attend any auspicious rituals like, the head shaving of the child or the marriage ceremony. They are not allowed to, participate in those rituals. So this is something which is particularly strict. But unless they go to another city and people don't know about their identity, then they might participate. But it's quite a rarity, I would say. It's not something which is generally seen. But I was quite aghast when I learned about it when I was the chief mourner for my father. And, I just noticed, I said, okay, does this also exist? I was not sure. So, many people don't know, but the ones who follow, they know about it. So.
Thank you. We have a question. I think we can take this as possibly the last question because time is soon up, from Swati. I hope I'm saying the name correctly. I recently read your book and it was very insightful. Can you tell us a little bit more on how you began collecting the data sets for your book? As in, like identifying informants, if there were any restrictions to assessing certain spaces where rituals were performed. I'm very fascinated by the depth you have given to your observations in the book. And then there's another section. I don't know if you want me to continue with the question now. Can you tell me if you also noticed if there are any major disparities between different classes or castes who has come to Varanasi for these final rites?
I would answer the first question first. So, Swati, if I'm right, yeah, the name is Swati.
Yes.
Yeah, Swati. So, I'm glad you liked the book and the presentation. So as I said, I started researching the book after the second wave of the COVID pandemic. So the first bit was, of course, interviewing the cremation workers and, collecting those stories of around COVID pandemic. I started with that, but as I went deeper, I understood that there are many other people who are involved in death work. There are women mourners in India. Swati, you would know about Rudalis and how these women perform these mourning roles. There are professions assigned to these women who are just invited as mourners, and uh, do they would do the lamenting work for the families. So I think that is one bit. And then it was more, as I came across more people, I started interviewing. And since it was not a very, strict academic book, it was more like a popular nonfiction book. So I didn't have to really stick to any methodology per se. But yes, I did follow. I did make sure that my interviews had depth and they were well informed, and I collect a lot of associated material to understand these rituals better. So in that sense, it was rigorous, but I didn't follow any research methodology per se for this book. um, I found it was not easy talking to people, but it was not that difficult also because people wanted to speak, and especially death workers. And I've also spoken to filmmakers who have made mainstream films on these subjects. So people from all walks of life have contributed to this book, and even people from academic background, researchers. I've spoken to so many people, and I don't think any one of them have said no, barring I think one or two who didn't have time or had other problems, or because of uh, unavailability, they couldn't contribute to the book. But mostly, I think I would say 98% of the people I've contacted were willing to share their stories with me. So it hasn't been difficult in that sense. I think being researchers, it helps us in approaching people. So I think that makes our work a little easier as compared to other people who perhaps haven't done any academic research. So, yeah. Your second question around Varanasi, I don't know if they'll ask you your caste in Varanasi. They do ask you about your goth, but does that also mean that they're going to discriminate? Is something which I haven't explored, but yes, that can be looked into. Yes, but thank you for your question.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Meenakshi. It was really interesting, really an honor to listen to your experience and to to all that you experienced yourself as part of the process. I want to thank everyone for attending. We'll see you in around a month for the next event, the June event. All the details are on the ASDS website. Thank you very much.